Welcome to Off the Wire, the podcast that helps you curb your cybersecurity risk and tackle technology challenges. I'm Tanner and I'm joined by Anthony. We're two IT executives with 35 years of experience. Let's start the show. Welcome back to Off the Wire. We're going to go back to the podcast roots this week, where we kind of have like a debate back and forth. We were talking about something that was really interesting to us. We've been back and forth this week talking about policies, and policies may be kind of, I guess, boring to some people, but it's important to have the right policies to prepare a foundation for you to kind of do the technology on top of those. If you don't have the right policies, you're going to have problems no matter what type of technology foundation you're putting on top of that. I think it's going to be interesting to kind of talk about our top 5 policies, and we had to pick and choose because we think there are more than 5 policies you need to have, but we kind of limited ourselves to 5 policies so we would kind of focus on what we thought was the most important. And we're just going to go back and forth and kind of debate our policies and our picks for the top 5 policies, and we're just going to go through it. So Anthony, you think your list is better than mine?
Let me preface this with I wanted to pick this topic because this is one of our weaknesses, and going through the CIS controls and also doing a tabletop really portrayed that we need to finish doing policies. We've got a few, didn't have any a few years back, except for really just like a acceptable use policies. I'm really wanting to diving into this to help me learn and come up with that list, but 100% my list is going to be better than your list.
Okay. I like that. Again, to the viewers or the listeners, we have not seen each other's list, so I'm curious. I'm a little bit excited to figure out. I don't know, Anthony, do you want to go first or do you want me to go first as we go through these?
I'll kick it off. I think I'm going to start you with shocker. So we're going to go from least to greatest of importance. So we're doing our top 5, and I definitely had a hard time whittling it down to 5. The 5th one that I would go with if I had to start is the incident response policy or incident response plan. That's my number 5. It is important. It helps identify incidents and helps you label the classification. It tells you who's responsible, all the roles and stuff like with communications, who's the incident response plan team lead or whatever titles you have. And it talks about communications, like incident after everything's done, doing a post review and whether you test it annually or how often you test it. But to me, I would put that as number 5. It's definitely important, but I don't think it's the most important.
Okay, very interesting. In your mind, or maybe but we kind of got into the policies even before this, and now I'll ask individually on each policy, but how often do you update that kind of policy
Right now we're at annually. We
annually?
have spot checked it and did updates in between annually, but at a minimum we do it annually.
Okay. All right, that's a fair take. Our lists are definitely going to be different. So, all right. So I'll go with number 5. The first one we're going through, but number 5 on my list is patch management policy. Um, this is something I think it's more inward, I guess, as an IT person, something that you're going to have as your like department standards versus maybe more of a company policy per se. But patch management is just so critical. I feel like in the world we live in with all the cyber threats running amok, I think not having that squared and having a really good process around patch management, I think leaves you in a bad place. It seems like, gosh, I think the last 2 or 3 weeks, I don't know if you felt this way, but the vulnerabilities have just been crazy. It seems like every day they're dropping. We had one where we fixed a vulnerability, and the next day they released another vulnerability. It's been a wild, and I think some of the things that I would recommend being in there is how often you're going to patch. And I think that would depend on like the device, right? Desktops are going to be this way, maybe as soon as possible. Servers, maybe you can't do that quite as often. Then I think you really need to take it down into the individual devices, like maybe it's network switches, routers, your blade servers, anything that can accept firmware, I think needs to be in there. And something that I think a lot of people leave off of, really across the board, I would say technology policies, but make sure you have the who's going to do it. Not a single, don't ever put someone's name, if possible, into a policy, but put a role,
Yeah.
some role. Maybe it's If it's servers, servers are going to be done by a system administrator, desktops are help desk, or however. And that who also needs to include approvals because you want to have some sort of override process in your patch management. Something about if we feel like there's a vulnerability, can this be patched in an emergency basis anytime, anywhere, and who needs to give the okay on that?
Yeah, that's one I definitely think is important, and I may surprise you on our next one, but we have a good process down, and it's taken us a while to get there, and we've had it down for a while now. But I do think it's important to have that policy. I'm not saying if I were to go away, if I get hit by a bus, that it wouldn't continue, but I do think it's important because there can be turnover at an organization, and we're not perfect. Obviously, there's things that we have issues with, but our process is definitely down and
Mm-hmm.
we don't have this policy yet. That's one that we need to work on and get rolled out. That way, no matter whoever takes over the roles, they'll have guidelines and requirements to keep the company safe. So I definitely think that's very important to have.
All right, all right. So that's our number five. So number four, Anthony, what you got?
I have patch and vulnerability management. So
Okay,
that's
I'm
that's
with
my
you.
number 4. So I'll give you a little reasoning behind it. I've got the incident response plan. Yes, it's important, but the other 4 are more so of keeping them out, so you don't have to worry about that incident response. Not saying you don't have to worry about it,
Okay.
but that was the way my mind went is the most important, the top 4, I guess that's a little sneak peek, but they all are about keeping you being a victim of an attack. But yeah, so, I do include the vulnerability in that. Obviously, we don't have this policy, but when we do, we're gonna include that. And just to add on one thing, I think it's good to also hone in on like critical vulnerabilities. Obviously, you're gonna treat them differently than your normal
Mm-hmm.
vulnerabilities. And I think also just making it a requirement that you're doing vulnerability scanning to validate what is patched and what's not patched. Because unless you're doing, and I know you do vulnerability management, but if you're not doing that, you really have no idea what's patched and what's not patched.
Yeah, that verification, and really on the vulnerability side, the verification of the vulnerability is pretty critical because we have seen, and I'm sure you have too, where someone says a patch fixes something that it doesn't. You can't just rely on that unless you don't have anything else to go by. Like if there's no way to test a vulnerability or something like that. Well, actually, let me ask you this because I think this is something that comes up and it goes along with this is how do you determine what level needs to be patched immediately, no matter what time of day it is? It's 10 in the morning, you learn about this, you need to do it immediately versus something that let's say can wait to the end of the day or after hours.
We do have our patch process down, but we do need to revisit our vulnerability management. The way I would look at it, and we changed systems and we did a different method, but with this new system, it will show you what is actively exploitable. Now, the way I treat it though is if it's external, it's like you're working until it's done. Like
Uh huh.
external vulnerability scan, there is no wait. And honestly, we do that with anything that's even a high. There's no not working until it's resolved on an external scan. On the internal scan, we do within 7 days. We'll try to do it sooner if we can, but we are doing it within 7 days for a critical vulnerability. I do think when we hone in this new tool and get what's exploitable, we may revisit that. We'll have to see how it works bandwidth wise. If we find something that's exploitable, that will, but if it's a critical, it probably is likely exploitable.
Yeah.
We'll
Well,
see.
sometimes they'll come out with one though, and even though it's critical, it's not being exploited currently. It will be shortly after they talk about it though. All right, so I'll go with my number four. This is probably going to be the most boring policy on the list. And I think it depends a little bit on the organization on how you're going to structure this, but I'm going acceptable use as my fourth. Acceptable use, what you can do and can't do with company equipment. Um, this again, I think a lot of people are going to say, "Oh man, this is everybody has that." I think for me and me and you have talked about this. I think this is the policy that needs to include language on what is allowed to do from a software perspective on a company device. And I think also, and this is where I think people it's like changing a little bit. Most of us have gotten to a point where we're not allowing local admins except to just a few people. So it's not as much of a problem when we're downloading software, but with software as a service springing up and people logging into websites, I think you'll find most people. don't think of a login into a website, whether that's, a social media kind of website or a particular tool. Maybe it's a project management software. I don't think they think of logging into a website as software, even though it is. YouTube could be content creation software, depending on how you view it. Acceptable use, specifically making sure that is highlighted software as a service as software and defining what software as a service is, and then making sure that you have some good language in there around basically that software that's not authorized is not allowed, and having a good process on how does software become authorized. And I think probably not the best place to do it in this policy itself, potentially, especially because you probably use many different pieces of software, but a reference to a place where there's a list of what is approved and
Yeah.
what isn't approved. So acceptable use, probably been around for 25 years, but I think today's world needs a couple tweaks.
I'll go ahead and tell you, AUP was number 6 for me, so it did not make the list, but I had a hard time. Now, one of my policies will cover a few things into it, but it's not AUP at all.
Like I said, for those listening and watching, we did not share anything with each other.
Yeah.
I've been curious so far.
That you got me second guessing myself because with BYOD and just even
Mm-hmm.
our internal devices, we got pretty locked down. But anyway, you got me questioning that one, but I'm gonna stick to my guns.
All right, before we go to number 3 and work our way toward our top policies, let's do a quick break. If you're enjoying the content you're either listening to or viewing, please subscribe. It helps the podcast grow. Subscribe on whatever platform you're on. Turn notifications on so you can tell when we put out new podcast episodes. And if you really feel like it's provided value, the podcast, share it with someone. I know there's a group of people, a circle, a network that you have, people that probably have some similar roles as you. And if you've found some value, why don't you share it with that circle? We appreciate that. So, uh, at this point, we'll come back to the show. And honestly, I'm on pins and needles over here, Anthony. What's number 3?
So number 3 for me is security awareness and training policy. Now, before I go into it, I do wanna go back and give my logic. So we both had patch management in there, and I think that's important. But people are inherently our biggest weakness. I hate to say that, but it is the case. When we went through the Verizon DBIR or data breach investigation report, it did show that vulnerability is on the rise. It's still, the number one avenue for people to get into your network or for an incident to happen is through your people. So, for number 3, security awareness and training policy, have what the mandatory training for new employees. What refresher training do you have? At least it needs to be annual. Talk about that. Possibly have like if you're doing phishing simulation tests, have that in there and have some information on there. Maybe have a little bit of bite in there if you have repeat
Mm-hmm.
offenders. And then this is one thing that we definitely need to work on is specialized training for high risk roles. We all have those roles at our company that get attacked more. For us, I would say like the CEO, finance, and HR.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, IT has been a target. Matter of fact, last month, IT, we had all the malware that was our email filtering system caught. They were all targeted towards IT. That was a new one. That was a surprise.
Wasn't there one recently, if I'm not mistaken, that was specific phishing tests against a help desk, basically on password resets? I think that was pretty recent, maybe the last 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, that
Um,
was, and even MGM, they did the same thing, that MGM
okay.
breach. But so
Uh,
for me, number 3 is focusing on the people, the security awareness and training policy. So be curious, what
okay.
is your number?
All right. First, I'll say that I think that's a good one to have in there. And we did make it hard on ourselves because 5 is just too few. We were gonna kind of allow us to combine some, but I thought, yeah, that's kind of cheating. It, we gotta stick to our guns, as you say. So I like the inclusion of that, especially going along with the patch management and the other things. It starts to really build, your cyber program. So I think it is important. Okay, this one I think is one that I have heard the most interest from me personally. I guess people reaching out to me in the last 6 months about. So I'm gonna go like modern, cutting edge, and I'm gonna say AI policy. I think we're in a new era when it comes to AI. I think because of the power it could wield, the data privacy concerns that are out there, I think it deserves its own because I think there are people, and I've heard other companies that kind of combine this with other policies.
AUP,
But huh?
AUP.
Yeah, acceptable use. Yeah, that's true. I think a lot of people do combine it. I think it's something it's so distinct and so kind of industry shaking that it needs its own policy. So the things that I would put in an AI policy is who's going to review the new tools that may be used. I think that makes sense for a technology group to review those, but it doesn't really matter per se as long as someone is reviewing all new tools that are going into production. You need to have some language, and this is something that we want to change in our policy. We want to have some language for testing that allows you to test things without having to maybe put those into those approved tools list. If you're just going to check out a new tool temporarily for like a week, it shouldn't have to go through that process. That's going to really slow you down as all these new tools are coming out and you're trying to figure out which tools you're going to use and that kind of thing. Approval process, as I mentioned, whoever's going to be reviewing these, are they the person that approves or do they give a recommendation to someone who gives that final call? Have whatever approval process you're going to have down and in that policy. And this is one I'm going to say that I'm going to contradict myself. We do have an approved tools list in the policy, but I do think, going back to my earlier statement, this is probably best served not in the policy and just a reference to it, maybe a company intranet or some sort of area where you can update that a little more quickly and doesn't have to go through the whole policy approval process. And then lastly, and I think this is something that is really important as well, is you need to include something about work responsibility in there. Something about if you're going to use a tool that's going to help enhance what you do, potentially even do some of your work for you, then you need to be responsible for the output of that tool. So you are ultimately responsible for the output. You have to review it. And if the work is not up to standard, then it is on you for the consequences.
All right, I was like, that's such a millennial answer to have an AI policy, but I was sticking to my guns until that last statement you just made because an AUP will not cover that. And I 100% agree with you that there needs to be something where if people are using the output of AI, that they need to be responsible or have some ownership in that if things go wrong, incorrect. Still not my top 5 list, but I will admit that my whole philosophy with putting an AUP is probably not the best idea after hearing. So I'll
Well,
concede a little bit.
yeah, I'll just eat my avocado toast over here. And no, I'm kidding. I actually hate avocados. I don't get the whole avocado toast. That's a millennial thing, I guess. But anyway, all right. Well, we are narrowing it down. I'm really curious on one now, as far as we've gone. But so I'm excited to hopefully as the people listening. But down to number two, hit me with it.
Password policy. So, password policies, I'll say this, I'll preface with this. Like, I think it's the second most important policy to have, but you need to focus on technical controls as much as possible. So, don't leave it up to their options to make it a certain character limit, technically enforce that. But where there are going to be some systems where you can't do that, and the people are going to have to do it on their own, and that's where you have to have a policy. And you got to have the minimum password length and complexity. Tell them not to reuse old passwords. MFA, like MFA, is mandatory. Like anything that's outside your network at a minimum should have MFA. Like all
Mm-hmm.
external, like cloud facing, have MFA partnered with that. Maybe talk about password managers or encourage it. And also just like the change requirements. And, there's a lot of debate about that. I hope no one is changing passwords more frequently in a year, but I do think it's debatable to be changing on a year or wait till there's some kind of issue with their password. Since we're on it, I'm just going to throw this out there. I still like the yearly thing because I think the password requirements are going to change so frequently with technology. I think every couple years, I think it's going to be commonplace to increase characters unless you just blow it out the water and do 25 characters right now. I think it's good to have a annual change just so people are updated with the minimum requirements. But anyways, that's my number 2 policy. I think it's pretty vital. Passwords and MFA. That's really keeping the bad guys out. for the most
Yeah, I
part.
didn't realize you guys did less than 50 characters. Like we've been doing 50 characters for 5 years. No, I do not. I do want to have a job. No, I honestly I think that's a good one. It is tough picking these because, and the reason probably I didn't include that in my top five is just because I thought that was more the more enforceable. I would say of
Yeah, I
policies without a policy, if that makes sense.
I
So
agree.
like I was like I can force that on someone without having to have a policy, and sometimes I think the toughest things to enforce are some of the things maybe you need to have policies for.
Let me say one word about that.
Okay.
OT.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's internal and not on the internet. So we'll get to that in a week.
Okay.
No, I'm kidding. No, I mean, you got a point, and, you know, I kind of am with you on. I know NIST standard now is no password changes until you have some sort of breach or some sort of reason they think you may think an account's been compromised or something. I guess I've just been in it long enough where it was like 90 days. And this isn't one thing that there are still some compliances that require 90 days. So check with your local laws. They sometimes give those little kind of disclaimers, but check with whatever requirements you have to abide by on that. But I do the 1 year. I would consider never changing, but kind of doubling that up to your point with we're going to go to never changing, but we're going to increase size due to that. So maybe a combination of that.
What in the world could your number 2 be if it's not even on your top 5? Like,
I,
I don't even understand
okay.
this.
All right. Number two, drum roll, is incident response policy. So you had this in your top five. My thoughts here, and the reason I included it so high is I think of the most critical things are when everything else has fallen to the wayside and you are out in the wind per se. So to me, an IRP is critical because no matter what policies you have, you are more likely, no matter what you have or any security, kind of enforcement you have, you're likely to have an event, even if you have none or if you have everything we've talked about tonight. So I thought because of that, IRP is so critical. And for me, really, I think there's three key things in IRPs, and we did a whole episode on IRP. So if you want even more on this, you can go back to that episode. I think it's maybe one of the earlier episodes me and you did together, but
Yeah.
really for me, it's three things. It's roles, like who's doing what, what's required of each person in the incident, classification of the incident, and response for each classification. Those are to me the three things. And obviously, I think these have expanded over the years to now and maybe include third party events, to include maybe to your point, OT events, because those are special. So that's why I did number two. I thought of it as what if all our other policies don't help us? We need to be able to respond to how someone either circumvented our actual enforcements or our policies ourselves.
It's in my top 5, I'm not gonna argue it, and I felt like when I listed it as number 5 that someone would wanna slap me across the head and say, "You're crazy for having it listed number 5," but it did make the top 5. I'll just throw it out there, so I do think it's
Yeah,
important.
yeah. No, we're both in it. I mean, and I honestly, sometimes I feel like almost all of these are just equally important, but
Yeah,
we did force ourselves to pick. So,
yeah. Alright, so we're down to number 1. So for number 1, it is identity and access management policy. Least privilege, role-based controls, onboarding, offboarding, which is anyways, that's the bane to my existence right now is the offboarding policy. It definitely would include MFA. There's a little bit of overlap with that and the password policy, and then just reviewing the access controls, like who has access to what. At a minimum, annually, you need to be looking at access controls, maybe doing quarterly audits. So for me, if you're not doing, if you have an incident and you're not doing like least privilege and that's not spelled out, like you're going to be hurt. If
hmm
everyone's logging in with admin credentials on their computer, like you're toast. There's no stopping them. Or even your IT people. And it wasn't that long ago that I remember we had domain admin accounts was our normal user account. One of those IT accounts gets taken over. And anyways, I think that's to me, that's the number one thing is the identity and access management policies, having something in place to make sure people aren't getting more than they need and spelling out the least privilege for everybody.
yeah. No, I mean, honestly, now that you said it, I'm kind of concerned. I'll do, spoiler alert, it is not my number one. You make really good points, honestly, and I think it's just so tough to pick a top five. I could see maybe swapping out some for that. It is pretty critical as far as I don't know. I'm thinking maybe I put it in there just because it's something we can more control. Kind of back to what I said, like I can control that more without having to have the policy. But I do agree. I mean, it really does come down to that. Oftentimes, is the permissions, especially overstep permissions, or I think one that we don't think about enough is just forgotten permissions. Like someone just doesn't need that permission anymore, but they still have it. Maybe they're either, to your point, offboarded, or maybe just in a different role, or maybe in the exact same role, but you don't use that software in that position anymore. A lot of different varying reasons, and that can sometimes show up as you're tested, either a pen test or hopefully not with an actual breach. But I think sometimes we focus so much on kind of what we're not doing that we forget to focus on what we've already done, if that makes sense. And sometimes it's cleaning up what we've already done that's, you know, really could be the best use of our time from a security point of view. I agree with you.
I do remember one thing that you told me, and it really just didn't click, but I know what's happening is they change positions internally, and I'm ashamed, but, like, those people that get moved from one position to another, I don't think we've been going in and removing the stuff that they had, and that's
Mm-hmm.
something anyways, this is something that we're working on, and it's gonna be it's a big focus for us, but anyways, there's a lots of gotchas in there, but I do agree, like, you could definitely technically, you could do this, and IT in general is setting all the user accounts and the admin accounts and everything like that. So I definitely can understand not having this in the top 5 because of technical reasons. But anyways, it's still my number 1. So,
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I honestly, I think maybe if I had to do it for, I might have put it in my top five. So. But in the interest of us not having the same top five, I think it works out. I will say, if you're out there still applying permissions to individual users, you should please stop doing that. Please stop doing that. Use groups for everything. It will make your life so much easier. Groups really should be used as much as possible. I know there are some systems where that's just not a possibility, but if you can possibly do it, please assign permissions via groups. To your point, Anthony, that helps us very much because a lot of our groups are based on job role. So when someone moves job roles, we remove the old group, we add the role for the new group, and most of the time that works, except when they need to help out the train the old job role for 6 months or something, and then we forget about it. But hopefully that's not going to happen. But I'm with you there. All right, so number one. Now I'm sure everybody's wondering now that that's not in my top five, but I kind of went on a theme here from my number two, and I did backup and recovery policy as number one. Um,
oh man,
my thoughts are if everything else completely hits the fan, backups and recovery are what we're going to have to do. And our backups really are kind of our lifeboat if everything else goes wrong. So I feel like it's one of those things, it's we all kind of do them. Some people do them, I think, better than others. Some have forgotten about it because they've been set up for so long. But backup and recovery, because I feel like, and that's how I went with IRP, is like everything else has failed. What do we need? And then IRP really has failed. Our response is not contained, and we've got to start from scratch. So backup and recovery for me, four things I put down is what I think really need to be in there. And of course, you can put whatever you want in there. You should tier out your apps. So all your different applications should be tiered. You should figure out what you need to recover first and what you need to back up most frequent. All right, based on those tiers. How often you're going to keep or how long you're going to keep backups. This is especially important when you're maybe doing a response or recovery from ransomware. You need to be able to look back in and say, okay, at what point do we not have the ransomware and get that backup location requirements? So where your backup's going to be, and hopefully you're following some variation of the 321 method where you have backups in different places. I think the new method is really like 3211, where all of them are immutable. That other one, so ideally having immutable backups in various places, and various levels of access, and that kind of thing, so that you're triple covered. And then the last thing, and this is where I think we could do a much better job of, is the requirements on testing. How often you have to test the backups, so that you know that if you do, to my point, that everything does fall away and crash on you, that this is gonna be successful for you as your last ditch policy. So number one, backup and recovery policy for me.
I can't believe it's not in my top 5 because I've said and I've been taught that backups is the most important job that you have, while testing them. But anyways, I'm not gonna concede, but I'm amazed that's not in my top 5. I will say that. That's definitely important because anyways, yeah, that's one of the most important things we do, and it's not got a lot of pop to it, not a lot of pizzazz to it, but when it comes down to it, being able to and whether it's an incident or not, just being able to recover is super important because you can just make a mistake internally and screw things up, and
Yeah, I got some final thoughts, and I'll let you be thinking, maybe put some final thoughts together too. I was thinking about, mentioned it throughout the podcast, but I would say please don't only do 5 policies. Do more than 5. We have a policy that has a lot of different other policies in it, and it's kind of a generic, maybe a general IT policies, and it includes some of the things you mentioned, some that I mentioned, that kind of covers a more wide breadth, and it's focused specifically on what we are supposed to do as an IT department. So recommend doing that. And I think instead of having different policies, but the ones that I think are critical to have their own policy, you definitely need to have those spaced out. There are more than 5 that you need to have. We obviously didn't want to do a top 30 list or something like that, but just do that. And I would say don't sleep on policies either. I think a lot of times, to your point, it's not the most glamorous or flashy to have all your policies in a row, but it is really critical. And I think even as critical as having the policies is basically having everybody aware of the policies. So whether that's the users or that's internal staff, to IT, knowing what you have to do, what you're required to do, and know it for the users. So I guess training on the policies or teaching those policies are also critical. And the last thing I have, and I'll let you finish this off, but I would say be careful what policies you make, because you're going to be judged by that. So when you're making a policy, especially if it's something specifically for an IT group, that it's really kind of detailing what you need to be doing, then make sure you're able to do that. Because the last thing you want to do is create a policy and then not meet the policy yourself and then have an incident. That's not going to look good for you.
wow, you really stole my statement right there. It's along the same lines, not that you stole it. It's just a pet peeve of mine, like, you may look at other people's policies or you may look at templates, and you may say, "We gotta have this in there, but we're not doing it or can't do it right now." Like, just what Tanner said, put what you can do right now. Even if you know you need to get to another level, go ahead and do a policy based on what you can do today, and you can change it whenever you guys get to it. So don't let perfection say, "Oh, we can't do this, so we might as well not even have a policy." That shouldn't be the case. Have a policy. Don't let going A to Z stop you. If you can get from A to D, go ahead and do it. You need to have a policy, especially from a leadership position. Like, you need to have policies in place because what happens if you get hit by a bus or win the lottery? And I'm not saying, definitely, if I go away, like, our department would keep running 100%, but you just want to have that in there to protect the company. And, especially if you're in a leadership position, like, it's your job to protect the company and look at it long term, and having those policies in place is part of doing it.
Yeah. To me, I think having a good set of policies and good enforcement of that and good education of that, that kind of goes right along with having a specific rule set out there, especially as IT leaders. And if speaking to those that are in leadership roles that are listening, that's really ultimately you're there to shepherd the technology at your organization. This is part of that. Don't leave it to the back burner. Make sure you make it a priority. All right, Anthony, any final thoughts?
I think that covered it.
All right. I think I might like your list pretty good. So we'll call it a draw. How about that?
All right.
All right. Another episode of Off the Wire. We've, of course, love to hear from you. So reach out to us if you want. You can email us at show at Off the Wire podcast, or you connect with us on social media or on LinkedIn. You can hit up Anthony or I individually or the show page. Reach out to us. Give us episode ideas. Let us know how we're doing. Anything you feel like, any feedback you have for us. We're happy to hear that. We always drop episodes every other Monday, so come back for the next one. And until next time, this is Off the Wire.